What's up, world? Thanks for jumping in for another ride. I wanted to share my personal thoughts for some pros and cons when it comes to performance air intake systems. All right, so let's get right down to business. The first thing that I want to point out is what we are not talking about. And what we are not talking about is going to be a performance filter that is going to replace something like this, which is just a simple drop-in panel filter. What we are talking about is going to be a system that runs all the way from the initial air cleaner or the air cleaner assembly through the tubing that goes into the throttle body system. Just want to make that really clear because those two things are going to operate in a little bit different capacity. And additionally, there's going to be some different pros and cons when it comes to that. A lot of them are going to be the same, but some are going to be different. So just want to clarify exactly what we're going to be covering here. So what I personally believe is a pro or a positive as far as purchasing a performance air intake system is space underneath the hood. You're going to gain some real estate. And the reason why that is OE manufacturers go to a lot of trouble to make certain sound levels inside the vehicle, outside of the vehicles. They have a lot of regulations they have to stand by. They have a lot of EPA stuff to deal with. They have a lot of liability to consider. And additionally, they have to keep that cost down when it comes to the vendors manufacturing parts for them. And it's one of those things to where OEs very rarely assemble particular parts on their vehicle. They source a lot of that stuff out. Actually, the massive majority of it, they do the final assembly. And so that cost is always a consideration. And so if you look at something like this system right here, it's going to have all these little chambers and openings, and what all that is designed to do is to basically bring the sound level down inside the vehicle or outside of the vehicle. And as you can tell, all this stuff is going to take up space. So installing a performance air intake system is going to simplify things as far as space underneath the hood. And that brings us to our second pro, which you can kind of group one and two together. And I believe that is just a cleaner underhood appearance. It just simplifies things and allows you to work around things, especially if you're working on your vehicle yourself. But it's really just a cleaner aesthetic appearance overall. And third item that I believe could be on the pro list when you're considering something like this K&N performance air intake system, and it doesn't have to be K&N. I'm definitely not loyal to any brand. And sorry about Abby cruising through the video. My dog is out here with me. Well, it's a one-time purchase, so it will probably last a lifetime of your vehicle if you take care of it correctly. And a lot of people have a lot of different thoughts about that, but if you purchase a really good quality system, a lot of these manufacturers offer what could be considered a lifetime filter, whether it's oiled or it's a dry filter. And it's a couple of different technologies out there that work in different ways. Just keep that in mind. If you purchase it once, you may not ever have to purchase another system again. You might end up purchasing a cleaning agent, a grease, or a oil, something like that, to go ahead and maintain your system. But as far as repurchasing filters over and over and just throwing them in the trash, you could probably do away with a lot of that. So that, in my opinion, is the number 3 pro. The number 4 item on our list that I believe is a pro is increased fuel economy. And I know a lot of people out there are probably going to debate this. And I can promise you firsthand that on my 2016 Ford F-150 with a 5-liter V8 that I picked up somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 1.5 miles per gallon. I think that's beneficial. Now, there is a con to that, and we'll go over that here in a minute. So with that increased fuel economy, there is a lot of variables there. And what I mean by that is weather conditions, atmospheric pressures, your elevation, where you're at in the country or the world is going to play a key role in that. And additionally, fuel. And I'll just use this as an example. If I run 87 octane, or if I run 93 octane, or if I run E85 in the 2016 F-150, I'm going to get 3 completely different average readings of fuel economy. So chances are you will get a slight increase in fuel economy with a performance air intake system. That's not 100% guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination because there's so many variables there. But really the fuel economy just comes down to efficiency. The air is just traveling through a much more efficient intake tube that has smoother bends, no sharp angles, and it also doesn't have to go through things such as where this hose clamp goes on to, which is something that obviously the OE added onto it so that the intake had some flexibility. And additionally, I have to imagine that some of this stuff is going to be a huge cost saving for them. So that plays a huge role into it. And if you're buying something aftermarket, they really don't have to worry about all that stuff. So one of those things with the aftermarket is almost the sky's the limit. I know they're going to be looking for a price point, but they don't have to worry about the entire vehicle. All they're going to be worried about is what they're focusing on as far as that intake goes. So a potential for increased fuel economy is a pro for me. And the number 5 pro for me for performance intake system is, and I know this is what everyone's waiting on, is horsepower and torque. And I have to say that if you buy a good quality system, you probably are going to see a slight increase in horsepower and torque. I'm going to say that one more time just so that we're perfectly clear. A slight increase in horsepower and torque. I've heard it over the years from one end of the spectrum to the other. I've heard that you're going to lose horsepower. I heard that it's going to choke it down. I heard that it won't run. And then on the other end of it, somebody's going to say that it's going to make so much more horsepower and it's going to be so great and it's going to be so fantastic. Here's the reality of the situation. Seat of the pants, driving down the road, you're probably never going to know it. Just going to be honest. You're probably never going to see any sort of real increase unless you go to a track, you run it back to back, and even at that, you might see a couple of tenths at best. I'm just being honest here. It's what we live in. It's the real world. You can take it to a dyno. You can do back-to-back tests. You might see 5 horsepower. You might see 10 horsepower. Again, just like that fuel economy thing, there's going to be a lot of variables in that. Every dyno is going to be different. Fuel's going to be different. Fuel's going to vary from winter to summer. And the reason why that is from summer to winter is that fuels have anti-gel agents in them. That's a whole nother video, but I just want to share that all those variables come into play when it comes to increased horsepower. Reality is 5, 10, 12 horsepower, whatever it is, that's probably the average of what you're going to see. It's not going to be anything substantial. It's not going to be anything life-changing. You will see a little bit. Now, where that comes into play is if you're one of those people that wants to keep modding a vehicle. And to be honest, I really don't even consider this a mod. It's just an intake tube and a filter. It's really nothing more than that. So in my opinion, I think number 5 is a pro that you're going to get an increase in horsepower and torque. Just know what reality is. It's not going to be anything substantial. You're not going to go break any sound barrier records. Now, if it is a well thought out, well engineered system from a company such as K&N, or there are many other companies out there that you're going to see that slight horsepower and torque increase, it's just not going to be anything substantial. It doesn't matter what the advertisements say. And I have to assume that a lot of this stuff is probably tested over and over in absolutely perfect conditions to get some of the results that they're getting. And I'm not saying that there's any sort of false advertisement. I'm just saying that great lengths are gone to get some of these results. And so real world, if it's a good system, you're probably going to be okay. You're going to see that little bit of performance boost. And if that's what you're after, no worries. Just don't be expecting above and beyond what's really capable out of a simple system like this. Okay, so that's our 5 pros. Just to recap real quick. So we have cleaner underhood appearance. We have more room to work under our hood with that system on. Also, we have, chances are, it's a one-time purchase, so pay once, cry once. Additionally, we have that increase in fuel economy and horsepower and torque. All right, really quick, I got to ask real fast. If you're enjoying the video or if you just enjoy hanging out around the shop with me, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell notification, and let's keep going. Okay, so the cons. What I believe is con number 1 about a performance air intake system is pretty straightforward. And a lot of people may not like this, and a lot of people may 100% agree. I'm going to be real honest here. I really don't care either way. This is my experience, and this is my opinion on it. I believe if you're going to install a performance air intake system, don't take it to a shop. If you're going to take it to a shop, pick a performance shop. Pick someone that is in the performance community that knows about something like this. Even though I really don't consider this a mod, I want to say to go ahead and just pick a shop that you're normally going to take it to, that is fairly convenient, that you're going to run down every single time. If you have to have any service done, if it needs cleaning, if you need it checked, whatever it is, take it to that shop every time, or just read the instructions carefully. Pay attention and do it yourself. So if you run your vehicle down to JJ's Quickie Lube down the street and you're like, hey, check my intake system, or, I have whatever going on, they're not going to have a clue what they're looking at. Their goal is to be maximizing profit as best they can, and they're probably going to be advertising $10 oil changes, and they're literally just dumping oil in that has a label that says oil on the bottle, and they're trying to get everybody in as quickly and efficiently as possible because they probably have a line of cars, and they probably have people that have stuff to do in the waiting room and are not going to give it the attention it deserves, and that's where a lot of issues come in my opinion. So the absolute con number 1 is either do it yourself or just pick a good shop to take care of you when it comes to an intake system. And with that, we're going to circle back to a pro real quick. With that is, if you're doing it yourself and you're not having to depend on a shop to do any sort of service or anything for your intake side, you could be saving a little bit of money. Now with that, there is also the opposite side of that. If you're an extremely busy person, it may be very hard to make time to go ahead and maintain your intake system and clean it the way it should be and take that time. So there is a balance there. Now, I do recommend a good performance shop, someone that's familiar with those sorts of systems, or go ahead and do it yourself if you can make that time. The number 2 con that I believe that performance air intake systems have on vehicles is the noise level. Now, when I say noise level, it's going to be increased primarily inside the vehicle, but also outside. And the reason why is, if you remember all those tubes and chambers that were on this, Well, that's what they do. They decrease that noise level. And the reason that noise exists is because, well, engines are just an air pump and they do not make a static vacuum. They actually make a dynamic vacuum. And so those pulses come through the intake and additionally out of the exhaust. And that's what exhaust companies have been capitalizing on for years to increase exhaust flow. So with that performance air intake system, all of that goes away and that noise comes directly out of that intake system. It's just part of the game. Now, the reason why I really wanted to reference this is I owned a 2012 F-150 Platinum, so great sound deadening, great vehicle, and it had a 5.4 liter V8 in it, and I installed the K&N intake system and an exhaust system and a tune. And I used this truck a lot for business, and I would use the Bluetooth system for making some calls and stuff while I was driving on longer trips. And so what would happen is if I was on a Bluetooth call and I started to go up a grade, and the load on the engine increased, what would happen is the background noise would start to interfere with the Bluetooth. And then at that point, well, I would just have to either switch over to speakerphone or do something different and just continue hands-free that way. But it would mess with it at times. And there was other times where maybe I wanted to take a client or a contractor out to lunch or something like that. And I would notice as we would go to lunch that there was just an increase in noise. And so that's why I really want to point this out. If it's a professional environment or maybe something where you're going to be taking clients out, no matter what the vehicle is, it really doesn't matter. I'm just referencing a truck as an example. No matter what that situation is, just be aware of that noise level increase. And I'll just use this truck as another example really quick. I have a really good friend that actually drove me home from the hospital after having a shoulder surgery. And he asked me as we were driving home, he's like, what exhaust is on this truck? I said, it's completely stock. And he's like, well, what's the noise coming from? He said, well, what's the increased sound coming from? Well, it's the air intake system. So that air intake system will mimic those noises of a slightly modified exhaust. Nothing major, just a slightly modified exhaust. Just know that that's the increase that you're going to get. It's not going to be anything over the top. It's not going to be anything crazy. But if you plan on down the road, maybe adding exhaust to it, just remember that you are going to get that increased noise level. That is the number 2 con to me with the performance air intake system. Now, what I feel is the number 3 con of the performance air intake system, and I'm actually going to lump 2 of these together, is warranty issues. And I have to say that this is probably a favorite of all the manufacturers out there of performance intakes and air filters, is the whole warranty issue thing. I know they've all got their own take on it. I know a lot of people out there are going to say stuff about mass airs, and they're going to come in, they're going to be dripping with oil, and they're going to be caked up, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, here's my take. I don't really think that that's an issue with a lot of the manufacturers. Could be with some. I'm not saying all. I think that a lot of times that's a service issue, and that goes back to please do your research and do it yourself, or have a good reputable shop take care of your intake system for you if you don't have time to do it. I get that. So with that, I will say that I have never personally had a warranty issue. I've heard about it, never actually seen it, never actually experienced, but I know it's going to come up. One to include it. Number 3 con, warranty issues. With that, I'm going to be 100% transparent about the mass air thing. I know there's going to be all the dealer techs out there saying that they came in and there was all these issues and et cetera, and we've already covered that. I'm not here to talk good or bad about anyone. I don't really care one way or another. I'm just sharing what has been my experience over the last 30 plus years. So when it comes to mass airs, I've had a lot of K&Ns, I've had a lot of performance air intake systems on a lot of different vehicles. And so I'm just sharing what has been my personal experience over the last 30 years so that you have that point of reference. And I will say that I had one mass air sensor fail on a Pontiac, and this was a 2002 model, and it was, I think, 5-6 years, something like that, after we had owned it. We put over 150,000 miles on that vehicle. Long story short, it did have a K&N panel filter just like that in the box. Obviously, one much smaller than that because it was not a truck. But with that, it did have a K&N filter and the mass air failed. I diagnosed it, took the mass air off the vehicle. It didn't show any signs of oil, contamination, anything like that. After the diagnosis, narrowed it down to a couple of different parts, grabbed the mass air sensor, put it on, never had an issue out of again. Just want to be 100% transparent with that I have had one mass air sensor fail that had a performance air filter on it. Now, I can't guarantee for any reasonable doubt whatsoever that it had anything to do or not to do with that filter. Just want to share what my experience is. So, warranty and mass air issues always come up. So, number 3 is a potential, could be warranty or mass air issues. Now, the number 4 con of a performance air intake system, in my opinion, is, well, everyone's favorite, the cost. And the reality of it is if a manufacturer with a good reputation on the line is going to develop an air intake system, they're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resources into developing that part. And again, their focus is going to really be just on the performance of it. They don't care about the background noise. They don't care about the sound levels. They don't care about a lot of that stuff. They don't have to deal with everything that the OE has to deal with as far as that goes. So they're probably going to be looking for a price point for the average consumer. But at the same time, they are going to try to maximize performance. They are not just concerned about price point. So for it to be quality, sometimes you have to spend money. It's just the reality of the situation. Now, with that, circling back to the pro of the miles per gallon, is you might can recoup a little bit of that money as far as increased fuel economy. Now, the reality of that situation is you're probably never really going to get enough of an increase in that fuel economy to go ahead and offset the cost that you paid for that air intake system. So the number 4 con really overall is the cost of the system. Now, the number 5 con to me, in my opinion, with the performance air intake system, and again, I really don't consider this a mod. It's just basically a tube and a filter. It's not really like you're doing heads and a cam and something radical to an engine. It's just a tube and a filter. So let's be real clear about that. But additionally, with that, anytime you change anything from the OE manufacturer specifications, which the OE will basically be focused on 3 things: longevity, reliability, and cost of ownership. So the reality of that situation is anytime you change anything from that OE situation, you're probably going to be looking at an increase in paying attention to the system, an increase in maintenance, increase in just checking things out. So it's going to take some extra time, some extra effort on your part, because it's changed from OE. It's just the reality of the situation. And I think a lot of times when people run into situations with a bad experience or something went terribly wrong, whatever it may be, I think it's just that people really aren't used to aftermarket parts and having to pay extra attention. You know, it's one of those situations where just previously, a few generations before, you were doing some sort of absolute miracle if you got 100 to 110,000 miles out of a car without having to rebuild the engine. And now we have vehicles that go 2 and 3 and 4 and 500,000 miles and require very little maintenance relatively. So it's one of those things that if you're going to be changing anything, just be prepared to spend some extra time, some extra effort. Make sure you're paying attention to that maintenance. And at the end of the day, if you're going to be doing it yourself, just enjoy the time doing it. So the number 5 con to me is just the fact that you're going to have to spend some extra time, pay extra attention, and make sure that things don't go terribly wrong with something that isn't OE specification. Now for the bonus, number 6, con of owning a performance air intake system. Now please do me a favor really quick if you enjoyed the video, if the content's helped you out, or if you just enjoy hanging out, watching the reviews, and what we have going on around the shop, please do me a favor, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe, hit the bell notification. All right, really quick, let's dive off into this. Now, I know that there has been a lot of tests and a lot of back and forth out there, and it's not my job to be positive or negative towards anything. Again, I'm just strictly sharing my experience, and there are tests out there that range from millions of dollars worth of equipment with all kinds of scenarios in absolute controlled environments, all the way to some guy in a garage with a salt shaker and a vacuum hooked up to an air filter. And here's the reality of the situation. Environment will play a role. It's just what it is. So if you are going to be driving 20 miles alongside of a beach every day, you're going to have a massive exposure to really fine silica beach sand. Or if you're in the desert, you're going to have a massive exposure to desert sand. For me personally, I'm in Texas, and I normally drive Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas area, maybe over to Louisiana. I don't have that much exposure to that really fine silica sand or other external environments. Most sand and dust and dirt that I may see is one of those county roads with that white rock dumped on it that makes a whole lot of dust. So with that, the con is that you really need to pay attention when you're considering a performance air intake system and take into consideration the environment and which it's going to be operating in. So really quick, what I want to do before I get rained on too much here, because somewhere out there in the comments, there's always someone that speaks up and says, if you put one of those on your vehicle, as soon as you get that last hose clamp tightened up, there's going to be all kinds of boulders and rocks and mountains flying through your intake, and it's probably going to be caked up in your piston rings. Well, here's the reality of it. This filter is the filter that came factory inside of that stock air box when I purchased this truck in 2017. I drove this truck up until it was time to change that filter, and as you can see, I got my money's worth out of it. It's very dirty. And then I put on this K&N system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the camera, I'm going to walk over, I'm going to prove to you that I have almost 112,000 miles on this truck with this system on it the entire time. The truck doesn't smoke. There's absolutely no issues. There's never been a check engine light. All I've done is the correct maintenance on it, paid attention, took good care of it. So here we go. I'm going to grab the camera. And as you can see, 111,554 miles on the money. So there you go. There's your 5 primary pros and cons of a performance air intake system. And bonus of the cons is just pay attention to your environment, pay attention to what's going on. And here's the reality of the situation. If that's something that you really don't want to mess with, that you don't have time for, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the OE manufacturer systems. They spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort to make these things work really functional, really reliable. So just go ahead and stick with that. The choice is yours. I feel like this is probably a good foundation for you to start doing some research. Go ahead and get your bearings if this is something you may want to consider. I just want to share all the information I possibly could that may help you out make a decision if it's something you're considering spending money on, and it is a substantial amount of money. So don't go out and spend that money blindly. Go ahead and spend your money wisely where it's most beneficial. Listen, I really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you got some good information out of this content, or I hope you just enjoyed hanging out around the shop with Colin and I. This is always fun making these videos, sharing as much as we can with you. So you know the deal. Before I get rained on too much, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification. As always, jump in for another ride.